the next panel. And that is business climate innovation case studies. So as I mentioned earlier today, we will hear from 4 speakers who will talk about solutions, innovative solutions from both the SME, so small and medium enterprises perspective, and the corporate perspective as well. So we will have 15 minutes long presentations, which will be followed by a 30 minutes panel discussion. So if you would like to ask questions to our panelists, feel free to put them in the comments section. So now I would like to invite our first speaker to the stage, Nils. Hello, Nils. So I will shortly introduce Nils and then give the floor to him. Nils Lekeberg is a co-founder of Enjay Systems. That's a Swedish green tech company specialized in making energy recovery in impossible environments, both possible and profitable. Nils enjoys bridging technology and sales, translating functionality into understandable customer and societal benefits, and getting everyone involved aligned to achieve results. So Nils, the floor is yours. Let us share your presentation, and yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you. All right. So I want to loop back to Kirsten's. She mentioned that the type of startups that we need are 4D, doing lots of different things, like this Australian company with 9 different things that they're doing. So we're not that at all. We do one thing. We do hardware, which is perhaps in terms of investment and things like that, not as sexy. But I think that we have a very important role to play anyway. And I'm trying to set the scene first. So if you click, please. If we look at energy recovery in ventilation specifically, and looking at Germany as the example. For residential and office buildings, ventilation in Germany, they're saving every year about 55 terawatt hours. So for me, that's a very large number. It's very hard to understand. So I was trying to find something that showed what is it equal to. So if you click again, please. Looking at, see, what German imports of Russian natural gas was in 2021. It's actually almost exactly the same figure, so 49 terawatt hours. So you could look at that in 2 different ways. Either you could say that, yeah, okay, so if they didn't have the energy recovery and ventilation for residential buildings and office buildings deployed, they would have to buy basically double the amount of Russian natural gas or find alternative ways of covering that extra energy need. So it's a huge societal and huge societal challenge, and also potential for savings. So if you click again, please. If we go then outside of non-residential and non-office ventilation, there is no heat recovery available because the air is polluted. So if you click again, all that inherent energy, which is actually then recycled in office and residential buildings today, if you go outside of those buildings, all of that energy is considered a waste. And what we do as in our green tech startup is that our technology turns that waste into a new energy source to heat the building. So click again. Since we're starting here looking at restaurants on this picture, and that's also where our company started to explore the market, you could say that a single restaurant site could save about 100,000 kilowatt hours per year. It could decrease their peak power by 50 kilowatts, which would be about 10% of the site peak power. And at the same time, since they save kilowatt hours that don't need to be generated in the power system, they would save about 30 tons of fossil CO2 emissions. So there's energy efficiency, there's peak power, and there's, of course, emissions in this. Click again. But polluted air is a lot more common than you might think. So if we took the restaurants there as a first example, we have so many other segments around the world that have the same problem. Polluted air on the way out from the building or from the process that we cannot get to because the current technology is just clogged from that pollutant that goes out. So we can't get to the energy. Click again, please. It's a mind-boggling potential since we're just letting that warm air just pass straight out without looping it back. If we could get to all that energy that's being emitted straight out to the outside air every year, that would be about a gigaton of fossil CO2 emissions that we could omit if we could get to it and actually get this recycling done. And 1 gigaton is about 2% of global emissions in 2030, which is going to be about 50 to 55 gigatons. So it's a huge potential for this type of technology. If you click again, please. We're launching the next generation heat exchangers for polluted airstreams. We call it Lepedo, and I won't get into any more of the technology, rather than saying that whereas traditional heat exchangers normally have to work against natural laws when it comes to pollutants, we work with natural laws. And if you want to know more about that, I'm happy to tell you later. So if you click again, please. We've grown up together with Burger King. So we had our idea of what we needed to do back in 2015, when basically all our customers asked us that they wanted to heat exchange in restaurant ventilation. All our customers told us there's no solution available. And we had both the background and the existing customers to explore that further. So in 2016, we convinced one of the local franchisees here in Malmö in the south of Sweden, where we're based, to allow us to install our full-scale prototype. In 2017, as that trial concluded, they then ordered 2 more sites. Then Burger King Scandinavia, the master franchisee, came and asked, actually, our franchisees never do anything unless we force them, or they can earn more money. So what's going on? They then did their own pilot during 2018, and at the end of 2019, we had Burger King and Chop Shop in Sweden, where we were standard for all their new builds, and we were ready to launch. You might remember what happened in February 2020. So there was a pandemic that basically shut down everything that had to do with hospitality. So our plan was, let's say, delayed for 2 years. But if you click again, please. We've managed to continue growing. And now, as we then left COVID behind us, we're adding new and very interesting customers basically week by week. And if you click again, I will show you a little bit about, so when we start collating these customers into a bigger picture, you see Burger King Scandinavia, for instance, when they are fully deployed with our product, they will save about 12 to 13 million kilowatt hours a year, which in Scandinavia, with a lot of renewable energy mix, would be 650 tons of fossil CO2. If you click again, moving into Burger King UK, which we're delivering the first units actually as we speak, basically. They are slightly bigger, so 28 million kilowatt hours a year, and with a slightly different renewable mix of energy, 8,400 tons of fossil CO2. This is a journey where we've created an economical incentive to reduce emissions on customer level. So they can actually make their decision with looking at their wallet, but in looking at the wallet, they will also get energy efficiency, they will reduce their peak power, and of course then also save a lot of fossil CO2 emissions. And obviously working our way towards that larger target, which is then the global and all the other segments where this is actually deployable. So thinking of that 1 gigatons of fossil CO2 reduction. So if you click again, I will mention just quickly how we got this idea. And so as I mentioned before, we were constantly asked by our customers, can we get to the energy from restaurant ventilation? And we have to say no first because there was no solution, and then we started looking at this. And our first thought was that we need to find a robust filtration solution to this. So we need to be able to filter out all the grease, the soot, whatever other pollutants you can think of in different segments, so that we get a clean airstream that we can then lead into a standardized heat exchanger. We looked at a lot of different filtration technologies, anything from Alfa Laval's milk separator technology to ultrasonic solutions, so ultrasound. We looked at electrical precipitators, and in the end, someone mentioned to us how you make absolute, how you make sure that the particular accelerator in CERN operates under a perfect vacuum. And you can't do that with pumps. So once the pumps have finished their job, you condensate the last few particles out with a metal rod that is cooled to absolute zero. So condensation has a very attractive force on particles. We thought maybe we can make a filtration technology out of that. Turns out we couldn't. It was the worst filtration technology in the world. Didn't capture a single particle that we tried to capture. But as we looked at that again, we said, oh, actually, we probably need to put the logic on its head. So not filter the particles out, but use this very poor filter, which doesn't actually get dirty from the particles. And instead of filtrating the pollutants out, we redesign the heat exchanger, and we get a heat exchanger that actually can live together with that very aggressive environment and the pollutants. So the CERN particulate accelerator actually inspired the finished product that we're now launching. So if you click again, that's the end of my presentation.
Wonderful. Thank you, Nils. We're exactly on time, so thank you so much for sharing your presentation. And of course, you will join us in the panel discussion after all of the presentations. So now I will ask Phil Ashton to join the stage. And let me introduce Philip shortly. Philip Ashton is the co-founder of 7 Bridges. He did that to democratize access to highly optimized, agile supply chains, because smarter supply chains are better for everyone, people, profits, and the planet. Through his experiences in management consulting and logistics, Philip saw the gaps in existing supply chain optimization and the knock-on effects that it had on global equity and sustainability. So Seven Bridges now works to fill those gaps by approaching supply chain complexities as data-first problems. So Philip, the floor is yours. And we'll just bring the presentation in. There you go. And can I ask you to unmute yourself? I think that...
Sorry, thank you.
Thank you.
I think you can probably skip the first slide as well. So we can just move to slide 3. Thanks very much. So there's a load of information about this. Everyone kind of knows now that Scope 3 emissions are becoming increasingly kind of an area of focus for enterprises. And this stat is thrown around a lot. There's kind of 80% plus of greenhouse gas emissions will actually come from your supply chain or Scope 3 emissions. And actually what we've found is that there's a perception within a lot of enterprises and actually the broader kind of business community that most of the optimization of supply chains from the perspective of what you could do to reduce emissions has already been done. And actually we're now waiting for technologies to come along and shift the narrative with shifts to things like new fuel sources and new energy storage. It turns out, and we've done a lot of kind of research of this and pulled a lot of data together, that there's actually a huge amount that can be done right now to change the emissions output and the profitability of the supply chains that a lot of enterprises work with. And you can do a lot faster than waiting for technology shifts. So if you can move to the next slide. The reason that actually this hasn't happened yet, and actually one of the sources of huge barriers to adopting digital tools and software essentially to new processes to shift what your supply chain does from an optimization perspective, from an orchestration perspective, is very often that enterprises and the supply chains that they depend on have very poor visibility of how they actually function. They actually usually often don't have a great sense of what it would take to, from a cost perspective, to shift the way that they operate and the impact that will have on the supply chain. And they typically view greenhouse gas emission reduction programs as something which will usually be cost positive and reduce their operating cash flow. And typically there's huge dependencies and complexities within the supply chain. And this is a pretty typical pattern. When you look at any enterprise, you hear these kind of 3 things come out. We don't know what's going on really. We think it's going to be expensive, and actually there's a lot of dependencies and complexity, and we can't really handle that. And actually that's a huge missed opportunity, because the software that actually would help you look into your supply chain, run it better, help you plot a course to being cost positive and actually cost negative rather than cash flow positive to making changes to your supply chain and impacting your greenhouse gas emissions today, and managing the complexity and the dependencies within your supply chain actually already exists, and you could adopt it. And so we've actually been doing a lot of work looking at supply chains for enterprises across sectors, whether that's pharma, automotive, retail, and found enormous opportunity to both improve their P&L, but actually also reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, essentially just from running their supply chain in a more holistic fashion and making it more optimal in terms of the operations that you do. If you go to the next slide, please. So what we kind of talk about in this context when we think about this is what we've termed the green ratio, and this is how you kind of balance between your greenhouse gas emissions and your gross margins and your cost of operating your supply chain. And there is a very mathematical way that you can actually work out a direct relationship between these two and balance very explicitly changes in your supply chain, how they're going to impact your greenhouse gas emissions and how they're going to impact your costs. And as we've done this, we've found that there is effectively a new frontier that you can move to in terms of the economic trade-off you've got to have between greenhouse gas emissions and every dollar that you're going to spend reducing your greenhouse gas emissions. And it turns out to be not one which is cost positive at all. It actually there's an immediate set of reductions that would align. And if you think about this intuitively, this makes sense. Cost reduction and greenhouse gas emissions, of course. Reduced transportation requires less energy, produces less greenhouse gases, and typically will result in lower cost profile for a business. And so this is something that we've actually gone through with a load of businesses. We take their cost data, pull it together across their Scope 3 emissions, and then we can actually build them a profile very specific to their business of how they could, what actions they can take to move to either a lower cost supply chain or a lower greenhouse gas emission supply chain, or a balance between those two. And we kind of look at this as the frontier, and that frontier represents what we think of as the green ratio. You move to the next slide. So this is what this actually looks like for one of our customers. We had to anonymize this pretty heavily because they're a fairly large pharmaceutical firm, but the sort of starting point for where their supply chain was producing greenhouse gases and the cost of that running that supply chain is the top right hand corner. It's the baseline starting point. And actually what we did was pull all the data across their supply chain, build this baseline data set in our software that allows us to then start running supply chain scenarios and changing the way the supply chain actually operates. And by doing that and letting the AI determine how your supply chain should actually run, and actually think about some really pretty complex dependencies between different steps in the supply chain, we actually found that there was a huge reduction that was possible in both their costs and their supply chains. If you kind of look at the top left-hand corner and the bottom right-hand corner, these are the two extreme scenarios. You could either extremely focus on reducing the cost of the supply chain, that would slightly increase your greenhouse gas emissions, or you could focus on reducing the greenhouse gas emissions, and that would slightly increase your costs. But actually, in between those extremes, there is a huge number of scenarios which balance those two things, where you take certain actions but not others. And those represent, as you can see, massive reductions, both in cost in some cases and in greenhouse gas emissions, both in the optimal point, balancing between those two things kind of equally, which is where we actually term the green ratio, would actually be reducing both by approximately about 30%. And that is purely operational steps that we're talking about here. So if you move to the next slide, you can see some examples. So these are things which we look at all of these changes in terms of level of effort and the impact that it's going to have on cost and the greenhouse gas emissions. And you can see here some pretty practical things which a business could take a step towards right away. These are not kind of wait a few years, embed some new processes. They're actually things which can be done straight away with existing tools, existing software, and embedded into the activities of the supply chain within a matter of weeks. And there are things in here which are pretty obvious. You know, if you're able to reduce the total distance, the routing that you send a shipment down, it has a huge impact on your greenhouse gas emissions, but it also tends to have a huge impact on your costs. A lot of businesses actually can't do complex routing because the dependencies on individual orders are actually too much for them to manage. So they tend to simplify things down into just simple steps that they're moving things down. And then as a result, some orders will go ridiculous, long routes around the world to get to you. You probably all had UPS deliveries coming from China at some point that you've seen bounce around, all different parts of the world before it actually gets to you. Those are a good example of something which actually it's a system level problem that actually is very easy to solve from a mathematical perspective and actually inject into those systems. And similarly, consolidating shipments, optimizing vehicle load, things you can do right away will have a huge impact on greenhouse gas emissions and actually on your cost profile. So this is all stuff that businesses should rationally do, that the hurdles to doing it are actually typically about adopting new processes and adopting new software that already exists rather than waiting for new technology to come along. We think this is actually really important. If you go to the next slide, please. One of the key narratives that we focus on, and one of the key things that we're constantly thinking about, is the time value of carbon. It's a critical kind of point. This is actually from one of the generation decks around how to think about the transition to a sustainable future. And the longer that you wait, obviously, to reduce carbon emissions, the steeper the reductions have to be for us to kind of hit our intended targets. So time value of carbon is really, really important. Focusing on transitions through technology shifts actually misses a huge amount of opportunity. They're taking 30% out of scope 3 emissions for these kind of large corporates, and actually down to kind of the mid-sized corporates as well, is something that could be achieved right now and will have a dramatically higher impact than waiting 2, 3, 4, 5 years. As you can see on the right-hand side, this is kind of shifts the amount of reduction they have to make much faster. So when we talk to customers, we're often talking about this in terms of, this is going to improve your P&L in the short term, but it's also going to de-risk your transition. It's actually going to make this easier for you to hit any science-based targets you already have, which a lot of larger corporates do. You won't have to do this in such a steep cutting way, and you won't have to have such an aggressive investment profile. But you can actually make the transition both in a technologically lower risk way, but also from an execution perspective, you're going to make this in a much lower risk way because you can see within your supply chain where you can make impact today and how certain that impact is and how low or high effort that is going to be. So the green ratio gives you an immediate kind of action plan for transition activities right now that will be cost positive, so cost negative, gross margin positive, and reduce your greenhouse gas emissions up to kind of 30-40%. Next slide, please. In addition to doing that, actually, the other thing that you can think about when you're building these kind of sets of data around your Scope 3 emissions is this will probably give you for the first time an accurate baseline of where your greenhouse gas emissions are, and therefore a whole set of corporate activities that you could start to invest in will actually become available to you. So one of the examples we hear quite frequently is people considering whether, for example, electric truck fleets might be a meaningful thing to move to, or alternative fuels for trucks as well. And actually, one of the biggest problems they have there is thinking about the supply planner's route job within that context. It's actually very difficult if you take your fleet of existing vehicles, change the ranges of them, change the frequency they have to stop, change the stop times. That actually makes the planning team's job a massive headache, and it's actually very difficult physically for them to solve it. But if you have a data set around how you're currently operating a supply chain and can identify individual niches within that which you could adopt, make significant technology shifts and adopt new, for example, truck fleets, that actually gives you a path to doing so in a much lower risk way. And so this baseline actually builds you a risk management tool and builds you a view on how you actually could transition in a much more meaningful way and start having low to zero emissions from some parts of your supply chain, again, faster. And finally, this also gives you a way to actually think about transparency from your Scope 3 emissions. You can build very, very quickly a view on how your Scope 3 emissions look currently, what impact you can actually drive straight away from the way that you consume services from that Scope 3 set of providers, and also where you can drive activity on their part that will actually have an impact on your supply chain and then track it through. And that transparency obviously is important for reporting purposes, but it's also important from an action plan perspective. If you don't understand which logistics service provider is producing a huge amount more greenhouse gas emissions because they haven't yet adopted any sort of operational efficiency measures which will drive consolidation and so on, you will actually not be able to make sensible decisions about moving from one to the other or moving volumes from one to the other. And the same thing when it goes down to product acquisition and product procurement. So we see this as hugely focused on speed and then driving a orderly transition that you can do in a very predictable way because you have the data about both your costs, your greenhouse gas emissions, and actually ultimately you can get into things around risk and resilience from making that transition. Actually, you should be able to boost your resilience and generally in your supply chain making this transition. Next slide, please. So we do this already for a number of customers who range from the very large pharmaceutical providers of the world, big retailers, and so on. This is an increasing area of focus for a lot of businesses, is how to kind of make these business case processes work for decarbonisation right now, because there are transitions which don't require huge capex expenditure and actually can just be positive from your operating perspective. So we're doing this all the time. If you'd like to know more about it and want to get in contact, we actually have a white paper up that you can download and have a look at, and allows you to get inside how we've done the analysis for one of our customers. And alternatively, if you just want to reach out and have a chat about any of this, please feel free to have contact details on the left.
Great, thank you, Philip. So now we will move to our next speaker, Matthias Norden. Matthias is the CEO of Valor Solutions, a company that brings solutions reforming the energy use of the real estate sector. So it transforms the way we think about energy use in buildings, from separate components that each respond reactively to their immediate energy needs to cognitive units that are proactive about their upcoming needs and communicate with each other and even their inhabitants. So Matthias, tell us more about that.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. I will just jump right into it. I will start by telling you a little bit about the background to what we do here at Vala. And I just want us for a moment to take one step back and just look at the energy available in EU. And for here, I'd like us just to look at this from the perspective of the real estate sector and also from consumers. So we clearly know we are quite heavily dependent on oil and natural gas, but we'll keep this in mind and just move on here. Households stand for 28% of the energy used in the EU. So I would argue that individuals and consumers have a large responsibility, equally comparable to the transport sector. We'll come into this a little bit more. First, I would like to tell you a little bit about CO2 emissions from residential buildings. On this graph, you see, if we move back to the left part here, the 1960s, and if you focus on the dark green line with the triangles, you notice that this stands for the CO2 emissions in European Union as a whole. And we see that in the 1960s, we were about 20% of the total fuel combustion. What is interesting here is that we go to the rightmost side to 2014, we have only reduced these numbers by 5.6%. And what I see in this graph is that residential energy systems in Europe are really outdated. We basically use a lot of the technology that was made in the 1960s. So looking at the building sector as a whole, we see that they stand for 36% of the total CO2 emissions in EU. So there is a huge potential here to work with this sector. And indeed, the EU Commission is also looking a lot into this sector and impose now a lot of new taxes and legislations to reduce these numbers. I mentioned also consumers and households, and I just want to say there that I would like to argue that there is a huge responsibility here for individuals to work with the CO2. And there is the old saying that there is just a few companies that are responsible for up to 71% of the CO2 emissions. But I argue that the products and services from these companies and those derivatives, in the end of the day, they trickle down to individual consumers, and that's where we can do a lot, but they need some help. The problem here is that people in general feel very disconnected from the climate goals. They see a lack of information and a lack of motivation to work with their daily choices. There is basically a disconnect of how the daily choices impact the CO2 emissions in the end of the day. And also people are quite practical. There is an old saying of, or an old concept in psychology called temporal discounting, meaning that people prefer to have like clear and direct benefits, and they want them today. They don't want them next week. Finally, these problems are very complex, and for consumers and households, it's overwhelming to know how your daily choices impact CO2 in the end of the day. Now, these problems combined was something that we wanted to do something about. So me and my co-founders said that we want to do something about this, and started the Vala project, or the Vala company. So we started this last year, and basically the idea is to apply tech to solve the climate crisis that we boldly state. Today we are 11 employees. We have 2 offices in 2 countries, in Sweden and in Georgia. And we are growing really fast. And what we have done here for solving the problems I just presented is that we have developed 2 products. And I will tell you a little bit more about what these products are and how they work. They stem from a cloud platform that we have developed. And this platform is basically, it works in the following way. We connect this cloud platform to residential buildings, and we utilize the data available in these buildings. With the first of our products, which is called Vala Energy, we take this data and we predict the upcoming energy need of the building. And this product is connected to the existing energy system of the building, and we can in that way do real-time optimization of the existing energy system. Secondly, our second product, Vala Home, gives, among other things, it gives a mobile app to the residents in this building where they can create a community and engage in climate reducing activities. Now, if we just start looking at a little bit at Vala Energy and what this product does, is it can obtain a reduction of heating in a building with up to 15% per year in building. And this corresponds to, as you see, 62 megawatt hours per year. And looking at the CO2 emissions, that this corresponds to is roughly as taking a diesel car and drive it around Earth for 19 laps. So we are quite proud of these numbers. With our second product, Vala Home, it looks as follows. We today offer this product to real estate owners, and it contains the mobile app, as I mentioned, and also a web portal for the real estate owners to handle their tenants. We have also developed in this app a marketplace where the residents can order electricity, broadband, and much more. And this marketplace is something we would like also to develop further and introduce climate-friendly offerings for the residents. Finally, I'd like to mention that we also have a climate news page in our mobile app that we serve ourselves. Okay, a couple of case studies. I'd like to tell you a little bit about what we have done, of course. I will tell you a few projects here, and the first project is called Talbohov Electric Village. And this is an ongoing project with a client who is called Tornet, which is a Swedish real estate builder and owner. And we have several ongoing projects with them with pretty similar goals. The idea is to simply put, reduce energy, improve climate, and utilize the existing techniques and integrate them with modern tech solutions. And the result from these projects so far is that we have proven that we can do heavy energy reduction in buildings, and that we can improve the conditions for both the residents and for the administrators of the building, the clients, so to speak. And as you see, you can note there in the photo there is a QR code, so the app is already present in the apartments, and the users can easily get started. Now, a second project we have developed with the same customer is the possibility here to use Vala Cloud to let the building automatically switch between different energy sources. And we do this by utilizing the data we receive from the building. And by then, the key for this is that we in real time also get CO2 equivalents of the energy that each energy source can provide. And then it's a matter of connecting this to the existing energy system and let those decisions trickle down to the actual energy system, so to speak. Okay. A few comments that we receive from users of our products are so far very positive, and we are really proud of the how this has been received, both from tenants and also from the administrators with the clients. Now, I'd also like to mention yet another case study that we do. This is about nudging of residents. This is an ongoing research project where the idea is to nudge residents using an AI engine. And the goal is to reduce the climate footprint of the residents. The partners in this project are Tornet Real Estate, again, AFRY, a consulting company who have developed this nudging engine. We have nudging experts from Gothenburg University and human-machine interaction experts from RISE in Sweden. The project is ongoing. It ends in the end of 23. And what is happening right now is that the developed AI engine is integrated with our mobile app and used with real residents. As a whole, in Vala right now, we are currently onboarding a lot of apartments. We have developed our products and we have tested them, and we are now entering a very interesting phase where the energy need in Sweden start to become very near to us. It's getting colder, basically. So we are running our systems, and it looks really great, and we are onboarding customers as fast as we can, basically. Yes, that's a little bit about Vala, and I'd just like to give you a couple of takeaways. So basically, I started saying or showing to you how outdated the real estate sector really is in Europe. It's still very dependent on fossil fuels and has a large impact on climate. So a lot can be done there working with this sector. The second point is that a lot can be done with tech, and we can reduce a lot of CO2 by simply integrating and combining different systems. The final point comes back to the title of today's conference. So we can definitely move towards neutral economies in Europe. And we are really proud of what we are doing, and I hope we can inspire in some way. We take large leaps right now, and we have lots of customers, and we're growing fast. We seek talents and partners for our company. So with that, I'd just like to finish. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much for the presentation. So now I would like to invite our final speaker for today before we go to the panel discussion. So our next speaker is Maryla Wojcieszek, who is an innovation shaper at Huge Thing, and I was able to pronounce her name so well because she's Polish too. And Maryla is working for the Innovation Hub that helps corporations to become more innovative. She supports those organizations in innovation-related processes processes, for example, structuring and designing or redesigning their processes, and innovation teams creating frameworks for working and acquiring innovation, as well as facilitating their cooperation with startups. So Maryla, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me here, and welcome everyone. My name is Maryla. As Gosia already introduced me, I represent HugeThing. We are based both in Warsaw and in Poznań in Poland. And I'm about to tell you briefly during those 15-minute talk how to make innovation happen. But let me start with an action plan for this 15-minute time slot that I was given. If we could move to the next slide, please. Yes, so I'm going to tell you like a couple of words about HugeThing, just to for you to know who we are and what we do. Then as HugeThing is working both with innovation creators and innovation seekers, I'm about to mention why is it difficult for those sides to cooperate. And then I will go to the main point of this presentation, which is actually the key success factors on the large organization side, meaning how they can, what aspects they should address in order to make innovation happen on their side. If we can move on, thank you. Yes, so as HugeThing, we support organizations in handling innovation. The one-eye monster that you can see on the slide is actually our mascot, and the way we like to think about it is that we demonster innovation, because it has become a buzzword, and although many people and many organizations are using it, we very often can see they do not quite know, they don't understand what innovation can mean to them, what it can bring them. So we actually, what we do with large organizations, because of course startups are born into innovation, that they are born in this sphere, we translate the word innovation into their reality, into their business reality, and we make sure it isn't scary, and the way we work it out with them works for their benefit in long term. If we could move on. Could we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. HugeThing was created 10 years ago, and we are actually one of the first accelerators that was created in Poland. From the very beginning of our work, of our operation, we support startups and match them to either VC or corporate partners. HugeThing is also part of Speed Up Venture Capital Group. That's why we are sometimes confused with the VC, but actually the HugeThing is the accelerator part, and the Speed Up is the VC part. But still, we are backed up by both investment capital and investment know-how, which has proved to simply work well for the startups and the corporations that we work with. Some of the partners we currently work with are mentioned on the slide. So we are sector agnostic, both when it comes to the startups that we support, as well as to the corporate partners that we work with. What is important and what is actually a new areas of our operation, we also work with governmental entities. Right now we are in the final stage of the project, which actually involves local governmental units in Poland, 36 of them, and during the process they were actually taught how to identify their needs for innovation and how to order it within the public procurement scheme, which, as you know, probably is not easy, especially when it comes to purchasing innovation. So right now 16 of those local governmental entities are getting prepared to actually launching the call for proposals for solutions which will be tailor-made for their needs. And we can move on in here. Yes, so what HugeThing does for startups? Currently, we offer our support to startups when it comes to pre-acceleration. We run a pre-acceleration program together with Google for Startups. It's based on mentorship and one-on-one sessions with tutors. Apart from this, for startups on more advanced level of their development, we run acceleration programs. Right now, it's a Poland Prize acceleration program. It's co-funded with the EU funds and is dedicated to startups from outside Poland, which are about to be brought to Poland, established their entities here, and also what is important and very profitable for startups, they are immediately matched with either VC partner or a corporate partner. When it comes to the corporate partners, the idea of the program and the acceleration phase is simply to run the POC at the final stage of the program. So this is very important because we know that startups simply need to get traction and must do the test before they can go and sell their solutions to somebody. And the natural part of our activity for startups is the matchmaking, which is of course important for startups to get the clients and or the financing from the VC funds. So this is also one of the elements of our activity. And we can now move on to what Hytring does for large organizations. I'm mentioning organizations, not strictly corporations, because as I mentioned, we also work with local governments. So we structure their work with innovation, because very often large organizations start with reaching out for startup solution. All the solutions, all the three of those that I have seen on the previous presentations are really great. And I automatically think about which partner of ours could actually make use of it. And sometimes when large organizations see nice startup solutions, they automatically think, oh, that can work for me, I want it. But before the inner work that is done on their side, it simply will not happen, and we've seen that happening. So that's why the structuring the interior of companies and public organizations need to happen before they reach out for innovation from outside. We also support the internal innovation leaders, whether it's innovation teams or innovation teams to be created. Very often these are single persons working for a long time in order to create the innovation unit or department, so we also support them. And we scout for solutions that will fit the challenges identified inside of those companies. And we can move on. Yes, so when it comes to those innovation creators and innovation seekers, why is it difficult for them to cooperate? I like to refer to those both sides and both actors as players of slightly different games. What is in common for them? Of course, they play the game, but as I already mentioned, startups were born into innovation. We could also say that they are born into in the future. And large organizations, corporations, they are playing the business games. They have gained the excellence in the business that they operate in, but innovation is a new term for them. It's also like learning the computers if you were born in the 80s, 70s, or 90s, and compare yourself to the children or to generation that we refer to as digital natives. So this is actually the point of difference, and at the same time, the area that both actors, both players can learn from one another. And why should they do that? We can move to another slide, and there's the quotation I like from Einstein, because simply it's not possible to solve the problems with the same thinking and manner of operating which was used and applied and actually led to creation of those problems. So I strongly believe in reaching out to look for solutions that are out of the box when it comes to mindset that actually functions within the organization. And we can move on, and I'm going to tell you how do we know what is the main challenge. The main challenge that we see on the large organization side is simply embracing the future while they are focusing mainly or only on here and now. And what is beyond the here and now? The next slide, please. We like to refer to the 3 horizons model. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but this actually nicely illustrates what is beyond the core business that large organizations mainly focus on. Here's something that we refer to near future and far future, and which actually creates a huge sphere of possibilities to all the organizations, if only they look outside of their narrow sight, which they focus on. So the core business is the main focus of those organizations, and the incremental changes and innovation that are usually brought to companies will simply not allow those large organizations to survive or to remain competitive on the market. That's why it's necessary for them to be farsighted and to look widely on the market, both to make sure that they will bring these solutions that will let them focus and address those near future challenges, which, for example, come up from regulations or the board's decision, and both from the far horizon, which can be based on speculation mainly, but still you need to speculate in order to prepare like a couple of scenarios that you can act on in order to get prepared to those possible futures that we know that might happen. And this some of those were presented today by Kirsten at the very beginning. If we can move on. Yes, so how do we know like what's the problem on both the corporate and startup side? Apart from our daily everyday basis experience, we also run like 2 surveys among both corporates and startups. So that's why how we know what the situation looks like, what are the pain points, and what are the spheres that actually should be put some work on and some focus in order to smoothen the possible cooperation. And let's move on to the next slide, and I'll tell you like why corporations look for innovation from outside. And this is based on the quotations from our survey. So of course the trend, of course the image, and of course the profit. So these are like the three main reasons for which corporations and large organizations look outside for innovation. But of course, fortunately, it's not all of it, because I know that also when it comes to environmental issues, the trend is there, and it's there. There will be no CEO who would say that he does not want to do environmental innovation, environmental focused innovation, right? So, but if we move to the next slide, you will see that majority of corporations also want to work with startups to improve their internal processes. On the next slide, you will see that over 60% also wants to create new products or services based on startup solution. And last but not least, the PR, still there's the financial aspect, so the direct revenue. It may also be based on generating savings. And last but not least, the PR aspect is also there. You can see it on the next slide. And why is it important? I put in one eye monster on this slide because this may look like frightening. It might be frightening to see that the PR reasons and motivation is also there, but it's important from the startup's perspective to be aware of that. So if you move on, because the time is running, so I need to rush. Yes, what the success of organization depends on. Actually, if you were to take out some points of my presentation from today, this would be like the next slide, which is the most important thing. So let's move on to the next slide, and I go through this briefly. This is actually like a couple of factors and like the major components and aspects that you need to consider, even depending on whether you are an innovation team player or a member, or whether you are a person who would like to introduce some innovation to the company. I mentioned before that there is sometimes the will of the organizations to look out and engage into some work with startups, for example, somebody from the previous presentations. But when I recently like draw the timeline and design the steps that large organizations actually need to make in order to make actually innovation happen, then reaching out for solutions outside their organizations would actually be step number 5, because or for which needs to happen previously are focused on preparing your interior for actually acquiring innovation and successful implementation of them. So the first and the most important factor is the well-defined goal. So the why within the company, like why the company is looking for innovation, what the goal needs to be achieved, what are the expected results of those innovation-oriented activities, and very important aspect, who will be the recipient of the innovation. Because when we see the innovation teams inside of the companies, they are only a matchmaker and intermediary. So always there needs to be internal client for the solution, technological solution, in order to make it happen. if you don't have an internal client and the recipient of the solution that you want to bring in, you will simply get stuck with an elephant that you need to push through your organization, and nobody will want it, because why would somebody want an elephant, right? They are busy doing their everyday work. So the goal and the why and the recipient must be there. Another thing is the responsibility. So who is responsible for bringing the innovation into the company? Who will be responsible for each activity and each step that needs to happen, and what are the tasks? What is very important as well is how the team and the person is structured inside of the company. And as you may guess, the higher, the better. So the board's mandate to operate and to make things done differently is very important, because as you also know, people don't like to change things. They don't like to change their model of operation. So sometimes this mandate from above really helps you to push things through. I know that I should be ending, so don't worry, Gosia, I'll go through the rest of those briefly. But the defined processes, innovation path within the company. So you need to actually design the process, and in order to know what steps needs to be taken and with whom you need to interact inside of your company to make each of the stages completed. Otherwise, we had like very unfortunate cases observed as from outside, fortunately. But there was one pair of startup and large organization from the financial sector, and they were working for 10 months just to find out that there is no technological compliance, compatibility. So simply the startup solution will never be possible to be implemented in there. So they wasted a lot of time and also money just to find out what is impossible, and such list of aspects to be verified as soon as possible really can be scheduled at a very early stage of analyzing some technological solutions. Another thing is proper measures. So it very closely corresponds to the goals. So how you will measure the effects and the results that you want to achieve, whether those will be like KPIs or OKRs, and who will be actually responsible for measuring and verifying it. But it is also important to have such measures, because innovation teams are very often asked by both financial departments on the board or simply other people from the company, what are the results of your actions? Because we only see you going around the conferences or having meetings with startups, but we don't see the tangible results. So if you get the measures, you have something to also show others to prove that you're bringing the value and you're doing the very hard work. Another thing which is very complex is the innovation culture. I don't know if you know how much time it is necessary to actually shape the innovation culture inside of the company. Sorry, we know it from one of the cases that we also are familiar with. It's in ING Bank in Poland, and the entire process of actually shaping the innovation culture and making everybody in the company familiar or how to work, how to acquire innovation, how to verify the solutions and their compatibility. It took them 6 years to do it. So it's really like a long-term process, as all the things related to innovation. It is never a one single technology phenomenon. So you really need to get prepared for the entire process of both shaping this innovation culture and making people accustomed with the change that you're bringing, that is going to last for like a couple of years. And of course, you can bring some quick wins in the meantime, but as a whole, it's necessary to be patient. And the last but not least, the factor which is very important is the appetite for risk and appetite for experimentation, and actually the attitude that will allow all the people inside of the company make risk, make guesses, and actually make even failures a valuable lesson. Because of course, innovation does not always end with success cases, and we also know such cases. Sometimes simply one of the sides fails, or the technology simply proves not to be the best one. So it happens, but the lessons that are brought from this are very, very, very valuable. and you will not learn it by reading about it in books, or like even listening to some other cases. If you do it by yourself, if you experience it by yourself, it will be even more valuable. But you need to have, again, this culture of accepting that some part of your innovation related activities may end up with a different result than were expected. And we can go to the next slide, and simply I will tell you why I think it's important to keep trying, even despite the failures and the difficulties they are there, especially from the large organizations perspective, because you probably know this definition of insanity, which means that it's doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So even if you failed with innovation and generally people are not willing to give you another try, you should do that, because you might do it a different way. You can make some changes in your behavior and in the model of your operation. You can look for other solutions, and one time you simply will succeed. Because it's very often for me always to hear that some organizations would like to approach innovation, but we often hear that, we have tried it a couple of years ago. There even was an innovation department, but actually it didn't work out. So we don't believe that it's worth trying again. This is what we hear. But fortunately, they keep on talking to us, so it's not a completely hopeless situation. But what is important, I think, also from the perspective of those beginners with innovators, it's good to use some support that will actually guide you from what is necessary to be done, and will also help you deciding when to look for innovation and innovative technologies, and from which sources that they can work well. That's all from my side for now. Fortunately, we have still the debate, so perhaps there will be space for me to tell you that it sometimes happens and it ends with the happy end, because we also have such case studies where those work with corporation and start succeeded. So I'll be happy to mention them as well. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Maryla. We actually started answering some of the questions we would like to share in the panel now. So I'd like to invite all of the speakers to the panel. Let's see if we can all fit in one screen. Wonderful. So we have some questions that I'm already prepared for you. That will be about 3 questions, and then we would move to questions from the audience. So if anybody has a question, please put it in the event chat, and we will share it with our speakers. So the first question is that despite the looming crisis, many companies remain ill-prepared for the transition to a zero carbon economy, and they might underestimate the change ahead, or act conservatively. And how would you encourage them to take bold climate action? It's a question to all of our speakers, so whoever wants to start, please go ahead.
I think it's there's 2 elements to the hesitation for most businesses. It starts usually with they generally appreciate that there is a need for action. They often don't understand the scale of the action required, and they often don't understand the path to any of the solutions that they would like to see. So, and businesses by their nature, once they're successful and they have an existing kind of way of generating profits, they tend to be reasonably conservative about risks to that profit base. So the only way to get them to move off that is to start thinking about things in terms of hard numbers and hard data that they can actually trust. And that is usually the biggest gap that they have. They understand that there might be a requirement, but if they don't understand what the cost is going to be, what the risk is going to be of making those transitions, they don't understand even what the steps are going to be that they might take. It's paralyzing for them. So that's the starting point, I think, for most businesses. Is just you've got to start providing data that can actually allow you to inform decision making around this in a practical sense, rather than just repeating the narrative, because the narrative is understood. I think most businesses, with some exceptions, where there are clearly bad actors in the market, most businesses want to make this transition. They just really don't know how to.
I agree. Definitely, what the large organizations and corporations look for when it comes to facing startups and analyzing startup solution is the evidence that it works. In Poland, for example, corporations are not willing to be the early testers of technologies. They always ask startups to bring the proof and the case studies from use cases from different businesses. And what they very often also go to is having the POC before they make a decision about like a full implementation, full scale implementation. So this is also actually a very good way for large companies to check the technologies inside actually on their own infrastructure. And these are also the processes that we facilitate. So I would say like first of all like get the data and get the proof that it really works and the use cases for those large companies. And second of all, just run the test. It is right now from the startup perspective, it's also a very positive change happening in Poland that corporations are willing to pay for those tests. It has not been that like a couple of years ago. So right now it's like more business oriented approach, and still startups can run the test, get paid for the test, and simply provide the best possible evidence that their solution works.
That's great. I just like to add also that I mean from our perspective, but I think also from a general perspective, it's also a matter of showing to the companies that there is something in it for you as well. You can do dramatic cost savings also by doing these investments. So it's not only a question of costs related to CO2 savings. So I think that creating combined offerings, I think, is really important to really be able to prove time savings and cost savings and so on, combined with CO2 savings as well.
Yeah, I'd agree with all of that. And I think if I add anything, it would be to think as a startup, then to think about which are the partners that need to be involved in this decision process. So you need to make sure that you have everyone at the table, everyone agrees that this is not going to be the wrong thing to do. Because you're always, as a corporate, you're always looking for avoiding to do the wrong thing. You're not particularly interested in doing the right thing, but you're definitely very, very interested in never doing the wrong thing. So that's one of the things that you need to be very aware of, I think, in this process.
Thank you. And so I'd like to move to the second question, which would be related to the very objective of today's event, is that we want to encourage our audience members who represent business organizations to accelerate climate action in their organizations. And what advice would you give to our audience members who want to identify those high impact areas of climate innovation for their organization and to sell it internally? How to go about that task?
So I actually don't think this is particularly different to any other process that you go through for developing a business case or a compelling reason to move to a new business model within business. And I don't think it can be inherently. Like if you try and bring a completely different lens to a business and say we just want you to start measuring things differently and move away from your core operating principles, they can only do that to a certain degree. They can only, there are places where you have things like the triple bottom line that is taken into account, but it's actually very difficult to operationally shift away from, if you've got 100,000 people working for you who've been thinking about how to generate a profitable business, to get them to start thinking about how to reduce carbon emissions as a separate thing. So I actually think the best way to do this very often is exactly as Nils was kind of getting at, like you've got to think about this in terms of where there are elements of profitability and where there are elements of new business models which can drive something that is going to be an immediate attractive step for you, and you can do that right away. But some of the longer term things like technological investment, they're actually just a reflex that the business has to build. You've got to, if you're going to put big capex out, that you have to be prepared to take the risk on doing that. That may not be something that businesses have done for a long time. So you might want to build a pathway to learning how to do that, which doesn't involve just going straight to here's a massive capital outlay, which will have a financial outcome for you, but in 5 years' time, there are going to be projects along the way. So I would look at this in the same way you normally do, and identifying those areas where the kind of the value is comes down again to how do you currently do that as a business? Most times you're going to be challenged on produce something, an evidence base for me that says that this is valuable for our business right now. How would I find that evidence? In the case of, broadly speaking, the case of supply chain and greenhouse gas emissions, there are ways you can do that very, very quickly. You can start to look at actually the raw numbers. In the cases of things which are a bit more challenging for businesses, like installation of their office space and the amount of energy they're spending on their office, they can rely on their building operators to start putting sensors in. That there are steps that they can take to start building that evidence base, and those are the practical ways that you can go about building the usual business case that still allows you to basically leverage your existing skill set as a business.
Yeah, great. And also, I think it's important also to introduce or to bring in external competence as well, who may have looked at similar organizations and may have some data and similar experiences from previous cases. So that's something we often get into that discussion with real estate owners, that they have done fairly a rough, like they have a fair idea of what they are up against, but that we also collaborate a lot with, for example, climate consultants who can go in and immediately say, this is what you can do, these are your numbers, this we don't know enough about, and as you point out here with the sensors, that often that is also the case, that here we need more numbers. Can we measure that? And yeah, I definitely agree there.
I could also advise something, something that we also recommend, and what we do together with the companies we work with, is simply necessary to go and talk to people inside of the company. Of course, the evidence must be there and the evidence-based decision-making must be there, but talk to others and try to get to the core of the problem that people are facing. And it will not be the first thing that they mention as a problem. You need to really dig out and get to the very core of it. And this is the moment when I like to quote Greg Suttle, who said that the key to really disruptive or revolutionary innovation is actually finding the most basic problem which underlies your business. And this is the way to actually really make a huge change in what you're doing. But you really need to get to the core of the problem. It might sound easy because it's about asking the questions, but it's really about getting the right questions and getting to what is really the problem. So that's like advice from my side.
And maybe to add another angle, then it could also be what we also need to do is as much as soon as possible. So perhaps you don't have to aim for the highest impact areas first, but look at what's ongoing in your, what's on the agenda. Try to follow that within your organization, see where the low-hanging fruit, what can we do first, and then move for the next step.
Yes, and one more thing from me, once you identify the challenges and the needs which are there in the company, the most challenging thing for organizations is to find this unique combination of doing, exploitation of their core business, plus exploring the new fields that are there, right? So you will always end up with those needs that are more here and now, and those more future-oriented. So it's also about giving the priorities to each of those in order to balance the things that can be done right here and those with those long-hanging fruits that were mentioned, and both actions that need more time to actually result in some change that you want to achieve.
Thank you. And so one last question from my side, or maybe there will be more from the audience. I already see some of them appearing. So when we talk about the climate transition plans and identifying the problems that we should address first, So once we do that, how do we engage an organization internally in the change management process? Or maybe if it's more convenient to you, how do we engage a business partner or a client in that process? So I would definitely want to ask about that, I would say more behavioral side of this process, how to run a change management process, which usually is innovation implementation.
Yeah, if you have a problem kickstarting the process, then follow the money. So check what are the immediate savings that you could make, and start from the money, and then let it trickle down from there. That would be my take on that.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing actually about projects which do have an impact on the sustainability of a business is if you sort of think about the change management process, and you've usually got multiple layers where you'll be, change management is actually, as a change management of the management team's process, the way they think is usually very much aligned to business case, but operational level, and if you're getting down to the very kind of tip of the spear kind of activities where people will be doing the day-to-day work, they're usually less incentivized and less connected to the finances. And the key thing that we find with sustainability-oriented conversations is that's actually genuinely appealing to them, understanding that there's a connection between the activities that they're doing day to day and something that will benefit the way that their company operates, which has a positive impact on the rest of the planet, is something they're usually much more interested in than the P&L impact of the project. So you kind of have these multiple levels of messaging that you end up having to go through. You have to start with that. Get things going, you have to start with something around the profitability usually, or something that's going to drive a financial outcome. But we actually find sustainability is one of the biggest drivers of operational adoption. And when you're starting to try and change things in your supply chain, people get it. They actually generally want to make positive changes there. And that means that you can spend a good amount of time on the messaging and the presentation of that kind of change to those operational folks in the business, and that's worth it. It's worth spending time thinking about how to market this project to those teams, what you're doing that's going to impact the rest of the world.
Yeah, I can just add a little bit here from us. I told you about how the energy systems in Europe are from the 60s, and it's not only those, but also the people in the real estate sector is also quite old and conservative. So we have a lot of challenges with this. But as Enjay pointed out, we follow the money, and we show how we can do savings, but then also precisely this, showing also to the people actually working every day that this simplifies your daily activities, and we can do something here which also benefit to CO2. But yeah, it's a big question.
Yeah, so what I can also add, like measuring, just to measure whatever you can actually, whether it's the money saved or the profit generated as a result of the change or the implementation you want to make, just measure it and show some numbers. People like to get the data and actually to have them delivered afterwards, which is very important. It's not to show it in the first place and then forget about it, but actually deliver what you promise. So it both for startups and both for those internal change makers. Otherwise people feel simply fooled. Another thing is the success stories. Show some success stories, because it's something that is very attractive to everybody. Nobody likes to boast about failures. Maybe after like a couple of years, once everybody digested it, but show some success stories which are relevant to your business, and this may also be something that convinces people. And the last thing from my side, it is very difficult, but it's about building this tolerance for failure. So it's necessary to, of course, it takes time, and showing those failure cases, but still encouraging people to try to do things differently, to make one attempt after another, and look for solutions that will actually be the perfect fit for your organization. So yes, it's about changing the people's mindset and being okay with them, with the fact that things may be either a success or a failure, but even this failure will teach everybody something. So this is from me.
I think that cultural change as well of trying to get people, getting organizations to tolerate failure to a greater degree is actually something which a lot of businesses sort of look at, and they think it's a magical process of, you know, you bring in some consultants and you can try and persuade people to be more failure tolerant, and that's not true. And it actually is, it's quite a hard thing to get over in the first place, is actually that you can take incremental steps towards looking at higher risk projects in the first place. So you can start off with something which gives you some meaningful quick wins in this space, which are highly predictable, and it actually usually just have some execution risk, which the business is usually comfortable managing. Their execution risk is core to most businesses. And then you can start to look at kind of increasing levels of risk. And once people have some success under their belts, they usually get more comfortable with taking a few more risks, and they have that narrative. And exactly as you're saying, like if you report on this stuff successfully, you bring those success stories to the fore, you generally find the organizations get more ambitious and start to think about, well, that's a bigger change that we could make. It's harder, but we're going to go after it. And you start to see also both tolerance for failure go up, but the chance of succeeding in a high risk project go up as well.
Yes, and you simply need to start, because we also see that, you know, people inside of the innovation teams or those single innovation players inside of the companies, of course, at first they don't have the recognition side of the company, but once they do like even the POC, even this test of the technology, and it's successful and there's implementation is happening next, they do get recognized, and they do get trust from inside of the company. That they can solve some of the problems that other business units are facing, right? Because innovation should not be brought to organizations just for the pure sake of bringing it, but it's about addressing the challenges or solving the problems or making some more ambitious goals fulfilled. So those first cases that are not always the first time, you know, cases needs to happen in order to also to build recognition for such higher risk undertakings, simply.
Great, thank you for your comments. I think it's actually very insightful to see that perspective of the implementation of innovation in the corporations, but in any organization actually. So now I would like to move to some questions that we have in the chat. We still have 3 minutes left until the end, so I would like to use this opportunity to ask some questions from the audience. There's one question from Kia that is, I believe, directly to Philip. So green ratio seems a no-brainer to take on now. Less CO2, reduced costs and risks. How widely is the solution spread? What are the common reasons why companies would hesitate on implementing this?
So the first part of your kind of question is right. It does seem like a no-brainer, and broadly speaking, that is our experience. We go into businesses, we keep finding the same pattern. So the reason that this hasn't happened yet and isn't sort of just everywhere all at once is basically most businesses don't have any data about their supply chain. That is, it's that simple. They will track things at a very, very high level, usually typically at top level financial metrics. And the information about the supply chain hasn't been very forthcoming. And it's only in the last couple of years that we started to see services come out that allow you to essentially take information about activity happening in your supply chain and turn that into meaningful information about greenhouse gas emissions. The combination of that plus a bunch of technology which allows you to take information out of some pretty hard to get parts of the world of data and supply chains means that you can now build a really detailed picture of what your greenhouse gas emissions are, what your costs are, what your risks are, and start to run that through some pretty advanced technology. So the short answer is technology shifted in quite a big way in the recent term. The reasons why businesses are hesitating, generally it's awareness. Actually, we just finally go in and we show them what is possible, and there's a light bulb moment. They realize they could have done this if they'd known about it. They just didn't know about it. So there's a huge amount of just innovation that's happened in the space that businesses aren't aware of, and they haven't really got the tools to use straight away. So that's the biggest hurdle.
So we're hoping to support you in that by inviting you to events like this. So let's raise awareness together. So we have more questions. Another one is from Laura. Hi, Matthias. What do you need to connect a building to the cloud platform? Do you have solutions for companies with many buildings? Thank you.
Great question. Thank you. Yes, we have solutions for that. It's the short answer. For buildings that have fairly modern energy systems where they are connected already to internet, our products are more plug and play. When that is not the case, we have partners who help us with hardware adjustments to the existing buildings, and it's off-the-shelf products, so we can easily get started with bigger portfolios as well, definitely.
Great, thank you. So we are just in time. Our panel comes to an end, sadly, but we hope that our panelists can join the networking sessions, or we can connect later on after the event. So thank you so much for joining us today for the panel discussion on business climate innovation case studies. Thank you, Nils, Philip, Matthias, and Maryla for joining us. And now we will move to the last part, to the last two elements of the event. So that will be let us see the next slide. Just a second. Okay, the interactive sessions. So we will have a En-ROADS workshop that is going to start now at 12:30 in the sessions element, in the sessions feature of Hopin platform. So you can go there directly. This is just in short words, this is a climate scenario simulator that would allow you to discover what levers need to be pulled to help us reach the or keep the global warming below 1.5 degrees. So it can be the price of carbon, it can be investments in renewable energy, it can be deforestation, afforestation, the level of consumption. There are so many levers that can be pulled and played with to understand what works best and actually what are the areas or policies that we should definitely invest in or count on to help us reach our climate objectives. So that's the first session that will take place from 12:30. So just now, you're invited to join the sessions area of our event. It will last for 1 hour, and in the meantime, we have a networking session available for you. The session will be open until 2 p.m., which means that it will be still there half an hour after the workshop. The En-ROADS workshop ends. But now, when it comes to the, I would say, official part of the event, it's over. So we thank you so much for attending our event. You can stay in touch with us by visiting our website and our social media channels, or reaching to us directly in the using the address in the on the slide. So now I would like to invite you to join the interactive sessions and see you soon, hopefully. Thank you again.